this week we've already spent a few weeks sort of talking about some important events in Riverside's history, sort of going into some more detail about the founding of Riverside, some important events related to Riverside's history of social justice. But Riverside, I think, we've talked about this a little bit in past weeks, but Riverside is, it's in some ways maybe at its best when it becomes sort of a soapbox for people from outside to come in and use Riverside's platform to talk about different issues or even just use the beautiful facilities at Riverside. So we wanted to go through some of the visits from outsiders and some of the celebrities that have come to Riverside, and maybe learn a little bit more about Riverside's place in kind of broader culture and so forth. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think unless there's any questions, I can go ahead and get started. We'll have plenty of time for talking about the events later. If you have anything that you want to add to anything, please jump in and feel free to raise your hand or send a message to add anything. And at the end, I'd love to hear anything I missed. I'm sure I missed a lot, and any questions. I received a lot of emails sort of all at once last night between like 11 and 1. I got maybe a dozen emails from different people. So I wasn't able to get to all of that, but I do think I have answers to some of those questions, and hopefully people can sort of speak up for themselves and add what they want to add. Anything I missed. I'm sure I missed a lot. As I said, there's too much happened in our many years. So
yeah, can I just add, we really want to hear your stories, just to reiterate what Vince said. Again, I mean, we've heard from a few of you, other events that we've covered that you were there. So that's always like the first-hand accounts is always the best. And for the emails as well, if I think some of you have emailed me during the week, I was on furlough. So I'm back now. So I will get to my emails probably tomorrow. So I know I just checked my inbox, and a few of you emailed me during the week. So I will get back to you, I promise.
Yes. Yes. And as I reiterating, I definitely, I'm sure that I missed things, and of course my knowledge is very limited. I've only been at Riverside very briefly, and my expertise, or if I have an expertise, it's more in maybe political history or art history, and not so much on the theological or religious history end. So if there's things that I missed, I welcome you to please shout out, and I'd love to hear from you guys about what some of your favorite visits were and things that meant a lot to you here at Riverside. So starting out, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention King's visits. We've talked about these a little bit in past weeks. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we've listened to some of them. I believe I've shared the link with you guys in the past of all the recordings of King's visits, but just sort of running through the actual dates. It was on August 13th of 1961 that King preached his sermon, Paul's Letter to the American Christians, from the Riverside pulpit. I believe that photo on the left there is of that first visit. And his second visit was November 18th, 1962. This here on our right here is the issue of Carillon, the newsletter of Riverside covering King's visit in 62. He preached the sermon, The Dimensions of a Complete Life. He also visited in 1964 to preach A Knock at Midnight. Also in August, and then August 8th, 1965, he visited The Man Who Was a Fool. He visited Riverside, delivered his The Man Who Was a Fool sermon. And in January 23rd, 1966, he preached the Transformed Nonconformist sermon from the pulpit. And then his final visit was, as we've gone into a little bit more in past classes, it was for the conference that the clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam was having. It was Vietnam, A Crisis of Conscience was the name of the conference. And he delivered his, famous policy speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence was the title of the speech. And so a little different, obviously, from the other five were sermons delivered from the pulpit, whereas this final one was sort of a policy paper, quite a bit longer than the other speeches, than the sermons, and very different in format and content than his sermons would have been. So that's King. Moving on. Another one of our famous visitors was Thurgood Marshall in 1966. So we believe these photos are from. It's from 1966 when he received the Charles Evans Hughes Award from the men's class at their 69th annual dinner. Charles Evans Hughes had founded the Young Men's Bible class in 1894 at the Fifth Avenue Baptist Church, one of the predecessor churches to Riverside. And Hughes would later become the Chief Justice of the United States himself. Marshall had been a prominent movement lawyer in the early civil rights movement. He was co-counsel in the Brown v. Board of Education case in 1954. And Marshall had founded the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and been its director counsel from 1940 to 1961. He left when he was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals by JFK in 1961. And then in 1965, LBJ appointed him to be the United States Solicitor General, making him the highest ranking Black government official in American history to that point. And so this, this award he would have received would have been just the next year. And then the following year, in June of 1967, LBJ appointed Marshall to the Supreme Court of the United States.
I muted you by accident. I'm so sorry. I meant to unmute myself, but I muted Vince. I just want to add, so while I was on furlough this past week, I actually went to DC Wednesday, and I got back yesterday, and I was able to visit Thurgood Marshall in Arlington Cemetery. It was pretty cool. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was there as well. We were able to see her. She's with her husband, and his information was on the tombstone. Hers is forthcoming, but they were like right next to each other. So that was pretty cool. Just a little anecdote that I didn't anticipate happening, but it did.
Another famous visitor, Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez spoke at Riverside several times in the early 70s. Chavez was a noted activist for labor rights for Mexican Americans. Along with Dolores Huerta, he co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, which later merged to become the United Farm Workers. He had come to prominence in the mid-1960s for helping to organize a strike amongst grape pickers in Delano, California. And Chavez's organizing was kind of unique for the time in that he combined sort of strikes and picketing, kind of standard labor organizing actions, but he also sort of borrowing from the civil rights movement, he began to use boycotts as well, in addition to the more traditional picketing and striking. And so he sort of asked sympathetic groups to help the laborers by not purchasing brands which were using grapes from the Delano region. like liquor companies and stuff like that. So he would sort of pick out a brand for, a few months a year and say, if people could not buy this for a while, it would help us out. In July of 1970, the vineyard owners finally submitted to that strike and signed union contracts, including wage raises for the pickers, a health plan, safety measures regarding use of pesticides on the crops. And to the next month, almost immediately, Chavez begins his next major campaign, which was for lettuce cutters in Salina, California. The lettuce cutters actually already had a union contract under the Teamsters, but they didn't like their contract. So Chavez kind of came in and inspired them all to join the United Farm Workers en masse. And the Teamsters kind of were forced to cede their contract to the UFW. And Chavez then initiated a major boycott against lettuce grown in Salinas. And so while that lettuce boycott is going on, Chavez comes to visit Riverside in November 29th, 1970. He comes to speak at Riverside. He speaks to the congregation and also has a meeting afterwards, again, sort of trying to encourage people to join into this boycott. He addressed, I think, about 2,000 worshipers at the congregation, answered questions in a discussion session afterwards. And actually later that week, when Chavez returned to California, he was jailed for a while for refusing a court order to end the boycott. And so he had been in Riverside just the week before. He was jailed for leading this boycott. And here's Chavez again, this time with Coretta Scott King there on the left, and Bishop Paul Moore, who is the Episcopal Bishop of New York from 1972 to 1989. This photo is from the archives. We don't think this is at Riverside itself per se. It's in our archives because we have a sort of a wide-ranging collection of all kinds of activism that Riversiders were taking part in, and sort of activism going on in the Morningside area. But actually, Coretta Scott King and Chavez visited St. John the Divine just down the street from us in 1973. And so we believe that's probably when this photo was from. The local contingent of the United Farm Workers were holding a parade and held a fiesta sort of at St. John the Divine in support of the continued lettuce boycott, still going on several years later. Coretta Scott King had been a vocal supporter of Chavez since the later 60s. And so she would visit with him quite a bit and go on these sorts of trips with him. Coretta Scott King visited Riverside many times, of course. Here we have another interesting visit from, is another archives photo that we have. Again, not exactly sure when this was or what the what the event was that they were attending, but this is Andrew Young. Here in the middle is Andrew Young, and on the right is Ralph Abernathy, sort of two of MLK's lieutenants back in the day, visiting Riverside. We believe it was in 1972. Both of them were perennial visitors, visited many times, notably in 1967 when King delivered Beyond Vietnam. In 1972, King had passed 4 years prior, and Young was in the process of running for Congress for a second time. He had lost in 1970. He's running again in 1972. He would go on to win in Georgia's 5th District, representing much of Atlanta, the same seat that John Lewis held for over 30 years. And he held that seat from 1972 to 1977, when he resigned to take a seat as Jimmy Carter's ambassador to the United Nations, the first African-American to hold that position. And Young would go on to be mayor of Atlanta from 1982 to 1990. And he returned in October of 1995 to be presented the Courage of Conscience Award by Dr. Forbes. Following King's assassination, Ralph Abernathy, there on the right, he took over leadership of the SCLC, and he would remain there through 1977. In 1973, just a year after this photo, we believe Abernathy was a key player in negotiations to end the Wounded Knee occupation, when approximately 200 Lakota and followers of the American Indian movement occupied Wounded Knee, South Dakota, for 73 days. He was sort of a major part in kind of playing kind of the middleman in negotiations to end that occupation. Here is another interesting, I did not know much about this incident until Diane and I finally tracked down the sons of the man who took all those great photographs that we have of King delivering beyond Vietnam. John Goodwin is his name. And we finally tracked down his sons, and they have this, I mean, just an incredible collection of John Goodwin had worked in the church center next to Riverside, and so he attended many events at Riverside, and many sort of activist events in the New York City area during the 1960s and 70s. And so he just has this just an incredible collection of photographs. And so we actually didn't know about this event until we started going through his collection, and he sort of pulled out some other things that his father had been to Riverside to cover. And we sort of learned about this event, which was very interesting. It's called a Celebration of Resistance. It was in September 6, 1972, in the Assembly Hall. Numerous anti-war activists assembled. Among the visitors was, here on screen to our right, is the radical Catholic priest Daniel Berrigan. He had been a member of the clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. And he had also, sorry. Diane, could you send Rose Ferguson the link? She just emailed me asking for the link to the Zoom. Sorry. Daniel Berrigan, he'd been a member of the clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam, and then also, along with his brother Philip Berrigan, had become a member of the Catonsville Nine in May 17, 1968. They went to the draft board in Catonsville, Maryland. They broke in. They took out 378 draft files, and they brought them out to the parking lot in wire baskets, dumped them out, poured homemade napalm on them, and set them on fire. So this stunt landed Berrigan temporarily on the FBI's most wanted list, and he was imprisoned until 1972. So just earlier this year, he had been released from prison. He was joined at Celebration of Resistance by Jane Fonda. She had just recently returned from her famous visit in Vietnam, where she had received her nickname Hanoi Jane. Also there was the gentleman there on the right is Tom Hayden, who would become her future husband. Hayden was a major activist in the 1960s. He was the leader of the Students for a Democratic Society. He had authored its manifesto, the Port Huron Statement. And in 1969, he had stood trial as one of the Chicago Seven, which, again, this has come up several times now, but it was a recent film made out of Chicago Seven, about the Chicago Seven. And actually, interestingly, I'm not even sure that they were actually dating yet. So it's kind of interesting that they were here together at Riverside. Maybe they met at Riverside. I've always wanted to find that out, but they were not sort of publicly together yet at this time, but they were there together. Maybe they met there. Try to find that out one day.
A Riverside love story.
The Riverside love story, exactly. Here we have Jesse Jackson, of course, has visited Riverside's pulpit many times. It would be impossible to cover all of them. We could probably spend a whole class just on Jesse Jackson at Riverside. But one notable instance was when Jackson delivered Jackie Robinson's eulogy on October 27th, 1972. You can see that there on the left as they're filing out of Riverside during Jackie Robinson's funeral. This the eulogy that Jackson delivered would actually become one of Jackson's better known sermons, at least at the time. He spoke of how the years 1919-1972 would be engraved on Jackie Robinson's tombstone, but on that dash is where we live, and for everyone there is a dash of possibility. Choose the high road or the low road, to make things better or to make things worse, but on that dash he snapped the barbed wire of prejudice. I thought that was a nice little turn of phrase. As I said, Jackson appeared at Riverside's pulpit many times. We have another here, file photo on the right from one of his other appearances. Here from February of 1979, it's an image of then President Jimmy Carter, along with the Rockefeller family at the funeral of Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller had been the governor of New York from 1959 to 1973. He was, closely associated with Riverside, of course, because the Rockefeller family was, again, still so closely associated with Riverside. And Nelson had also been vice president under Gerald Ford from 1974 to 1977. And he actually, the term Rockefeller Republican largely refers to Nelson himself, because in July 1960, sort of him and then Vice President Nixon was sort of more closely associated with the conservative wing of the Republicans. Rockefeller was more closely associated with the liberal wing, and they sort of came to this agreement now known as the Treaty of Fifth Avenue, where they sort of hashed out what the Republican platform was going to be for the 1960s. Rockefeller had also been a member of FDR's cabinet. Actually, we have a little short video I can show of a news report about Rockefeller's funeral. Give me just a moment to switch over to that.
2,500 invited mourners filled the stone Gothic Riverside Church for the hour-and-a-half-long memorial service. It was a church built with a $26 million contribution from John D. Rockefeller Jr. Prayers were offered by the church pastor, the Reverend William Sloane Coffin Jr., and the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. There were eulogies from many.
Father was an eternal optimist, a man who saw in public and private service the highest opportunity to fulfill himself and his destiny. He was a politician who was not interested in politics for itself, but as a means to govern. In government, he saw the fruition of his drives and ambitions in the solving of problems.
Nelson was a man of action with a deep belief in the worth and dignity of the individual, in the democratic process, in the American enterprise system, and in the responsibility of each citizen to revere God and to help his fellow man.
His failure to reach the presidency was, in my view, a tragedy for the country. What a great president he would have been. How he would have ennobled us. What an extraordinary combination of strength and humanity, decisiveness and vision. Yet, I never heard him express even one word of disappointment. If he were here, he would tell us, do not look back. The future is full of exciting challenges.
In addition to hymns by the Riverside Choir, there was a solo by opera star Roberta Peters, and Lionel Hampton played Sweet Georgia Brown in the Vibes, a number he had performed all over the country when it was one of Rockefeller's campaign themes.
Switch again. here. We don't have any that we could find. I could not find any file photos of the event, but we also had a visit in 1982 from Bayard Rustin. I was a civil rights activist and one of the organizers of the March on Washington. He also received the same award that Thurgood Marshall had received, the Charles Evans Hughes Award from the men's class. And so, unfortunately, we don't have any photographs of that. But
that we know of yet.
Yeah, I mean, yes. As a little bit of background, we have in the archives hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of photographs. But the process of sorting through all of those, of digitizing all of them, it's going to be a years long process. So what we're working with is what we have digitized and what we have that we sort of know of and can parse out what the image is of. But so it's likely that somewhere there exist photographs of this, but it's going to be a multi-year process to even sort of figure out what all our photographs are of. So just, not that these things are lost, they're just kind of hard to find. But yes, Rustin was a prominent civil rights activist. He also received this Charles Evans Hughes Award from the men's class in 1982. Rustin had been a key organizer of the Freedom Rides. He had helped to create the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with Martin Luther King. He had served as an organizer of the March on Washington. He later became the head of the AFL-CIO's A. Philip Randolph Institute, which helped promote the integration of formerly all-white unions and promoted unionization amongst African Americans. And during the 1970s and 1980s, Rustin had been very involved in many humanitarian missions, aiding refugees from Vietnam and Cambodia. And at the time of his death in 1987, he was on a humanitarian mission to Haiti. He had been sort of quietly gay for much of his career. He had sort of taken kind of a background role during the civil rights campaigns to kind of avoid that being something that people paid attention to. But in the 1980s, he became much more open about his sexuality and became to be a prominent voice for gay rights at the time. A message. Yes. We don't have any photos of Bayard Rustin's visit at this time. It's just what I was trying to explain, Emily.
Can you reiterate then who? Maybe Emily didn't hear who this was.
Yes, this is Oliver Tambo. I actually mispronounced his name the other day, so I apologize about that. Yes. Sorry, I didn't have a slide for Bayard Rustin, so jumping ahead a few years, we get to the period where Riverside became very heavily involved in supporting the anti-apartheid movement. Here we have Oliver Tambo. As I said, I mispronounced his name when I spoke about him a few weeks ago, so I apologize for that. He visited in January 21st, 1987. Tambo at the time was the president of the African National Congress. He had taken over during Mandela's imprisonment, and he came to Riverside as part of the Disarmament campaign's yearly conference. And we can watch a short video of, I won't play the whole thing, but we can watch a little bit of his visit.
We are honored to be here today to try to amplify with our weak voices the message which Olof Palme can no longer convey himself. He perished as he did because the offspring of the violence of our century remain as yet steeped in the idea that brute force can vanquish reason. Each of the nearly 9 decades of the 20th century has contributed its share to the bloodletting. Like the proverbial prince of darkness, each has seemed to require his portion and elixir of human blood to feed on. Along the path of his ghastly and fearsome logic are strewn graves that had to be dug to accommodate its demands. Among the fresh sepulchres of that last 5 years are those of Olof Palme of Sweden, Indira Gandhi of India, Mozambique's Samora Machel, and Grenada's Maurice Bishop.
Here is an archives image of Desmond Tutu visiting the next year on April 29th, 1988.
Vince, can I just interject? Sorry, really quickly. We have a question. What date is this? Was this? And it's for the
Oliver Tambo's visit?
Yes.
That was January 21st, 1987.
Thank
It was
you.
for the Olof Palme speech, which was the annual Disarmament conference sort of keynote address. Here we have an archives image of Desmond Tutu visiting in April 29th, 1988. Tutu was the Anglican Bishop of Johannesburg from 1985 to 1986 and the Archbishop of Cape Town from 1986 to 1996. In both cases being the first Black African to hold the position. Tutu was a prominent anti-apartheid activist during the 1970s and 1980s, and he had received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984, just a few years before his visit to Riverside. And upon Mandela's release in 1990, Tutu and Mandela were sort of the leaders of the negotiations with the South African government to end apartheid. And he returned to Riverside in March of 2009, along with best-selling author and historian Thomas Cahill, to discuss capital punishment. Do we have some questions, Diane?
No, we have Emily Anderson writing that she remembers that. So I was just going to reply in the chat. If you want to speak on that a little bit toward at the end, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, please. Love to hear about it. Of course, one of our most famous visits, I think, we also have Alan Bosack visiting Riverside on October 30th, 1988. Later that same year, Alan Bosack was a leader of the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa in the 1970s, which was segregated at the time. And by the 1980s, he had become another prominent religious critic of South Africa's apartheid regime. And during his visit to Riverside, I wrote this down. During his visit to Riverside, Bosack was asked what Americans could do to help free Nelson Mandela, the imprisoned anti-apartheid leader. Mr. Bosack said, "Can I make it a broader question? What you should do to free South Africa? Don't vote for Bush." A funny way of answering the question. I got ahead of myself. One of the most famous visits to Riverside, of course, is on June 21st, 1990. Mandela's first visit to Riverside. I'll try to run through it quickly. I know most people know who Nelson Mandela is. But he's a member of the African National Congress. He had sort of early on advocated militant direct action against apartheid. And in August of 1972, he was arrested by South African police following a tip from the CIA. And Mandela was an influential political activist by this time. He had been the president of the ANC's Youth League from 1950, and he had co-founded the armed wing of the ANC, Mkoto wa Sizwe, which is Xhosa for Spear of the Nation, in 1961, which following the March 1960 Sharpeville massacre, when police had murdered 69 protesters and injured almost 200 others during a peaceful protest. Mandela was charged with high treason under the 1950 Suppression of Communism Act, and along with a dozen others of diverse South African activists. As the trial began in April 20th, 1964, Mandela had delivered what is now known as his "I am prepared to die" speech, which brought sort of international attention to the case. In 1964, he was found guilty on all charges, and the prosecution had asked for capital punishment, but he was sentenced to life in prison. He would spend 27 years in prison. During that time, international attention to Mandela's case continued to grow. By 1980, the UN Security Council had condemned South African apartheid and demanded Mandela's release. But calls for sanctions on South Africa had been vetoed by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Later in 1986, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act passed the United States House and the United States Senate, but was vetoed again by Reagan. Reagan's veto was very harshly criticized, and in the following week, the veto was overridden by the House and Senate, which was very, very rare for a foreign policy related bill to be overridden by the House and Senate. One of the few times that ever happened in the 20th century. The majority of Mandela's time in prison was spent on Robben Island, which was a former leper colony off the coast of Cape Town, which had held the kings and leaders of the colonized since the mid 1600s. Prisoners like Mandela were required to spend much of their day breaking rocks in a lime quarry, and the light reflecting off the white rocks permanently damaged Mandela's eyesight. In 1982, Mandela was moved to the mainland, perhaps to kind of curtail his increasing organizing amongst the prisoners on Robben Island. But the new prison had, somewhat better living conditions, and also gave him more of an opportunity to correspond with people outside of the prison. And sort of throughout this time, fears of civil war sort of continued to increase in South Africa. More and more countries were imposing international sanctions. And so in 1988, after Mandela had become very ill with tuberculosis, he was moved again to a much lower security prison, and there talks began with the white supremacist National Party government of President F.W. de Klerk to negotiate Mandela's release and the unbanning of political parties. And so in February of 1990, Mandela was finally released from prison. He delivered remarks to thousands of people from a balcony in Cape Town City Hall. And almost right away, the ANC was unbanned. Mandela was returned to being deputy president of the ANC. And in May, negotiations began with the de Klerk government to begin ending apartheid. And so sort of during a break during these negotiations, sort of in the middle of this process of negotiation, in June of 1990, Mandela visited the United States on a campaign to raise money for the ANC and to sort of encourage the international community to continue these economic sanctions until apartheid had finally been ended. Mandela was greeted in Lower Manhattan with a ticker tape parade to the Canyon of Heroes. 750,000 people were believed to attend. He was given the key to the city by David Dinkins. And then the next day, on June 21st, before he went to speeches at Yankee Stadium, at the United Nations, and a town hall at City College with Ted Koppel, Mandela first came to Riverside. He attended an interfaith service of Thanksgiving for Nelson Mandela here at Riverside. And so let's watch a short video of that. It's a very powerful moment.
Have faith in the giver of life and let life be free. Let us rise up and praise God's holy name. Let us rejoice and look to the day when all of God's children shall say, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last.
I take great pleasure in presenting to you the moral leader of the world, the standard bearer of liberty's cause, the drum major in the music of freedom. I present to you this day the bright morning star. During the long years when we were in prison, you did not forget us. Neither did you abandon our struggling people. You took up the mission of promoting justice and peace. We salute you in the words of the prophet Isaiah. We have risen up as on the wings of eagles. We have run and not grown weary. We have walked and not fainted. And finally, our destination is in sight. We have committed ourselves unequivocally to opposing white racism and black racism. We reject sexism and have pledged ourselves to affirm
we'll leave it there. But I'm not sure his entire speech is online on that video that I sent out the link to. It's a little hard, as we got into a little bit on a previous session. Finding some of the video material at Riverside is a little bit difficult. So if anyone has access to or knows of a place that has his whole speech, I'm sure other people in the class would love to hear about it. There's just some few clips there in that video. But yeah, such a powerful moment. It looks like so much fun too. Looked like an incredible day. He also, here, this is another photo on the left, also from the 1990 visit. He also returned in May 14th, 2005. This time the tone was more of remembrance, so a goodbye. Mandela stated it was unlikely he would visit again. It's not likely that we will be traveling again to the United States. We are turning 87 in July. People our age should not be traveling across oceans. And he added, "We are in Harlem today not to ask of you," referring to the first time he was in Riverside, part of this campaign to ask Americans to kind of keep the pressure up on the boycott and sanctions of South Africa until the end of apartheid was confirmed. And he said, "We thank you and may God bless you." Then he added in Zulu, "God bless Africa." We also have we have a short video as well, a news report of his visit on that day as well. Just give me a moment.
He's one of the most widely admired figures of our age. Nelson Mandela, the embodiment of the struggle for freedom in the face of oppression, came to Riverside Church today. He's 87 years old and will likely be his last visit to New York. In a ceremony honoring the former president of South Africa and leader of the African National Congress, Mandela thanked New Yorkers and Americans for their support in the fight against apartheid of the past and efforts to bring about worldwide justice today.
We are here in Harlem today not to ask of you. We are here to pay tribute and say thanks to those who gave us when they even had nothing for themselves.
Mandela was imprisoned in South Africa for 27 years for organizing citizens to resist apartheid. He was released in 1990 and became that nation's first post-apartheid leader in a country then emerging from the brutal legacy of racial tyranny. He led his nation in the evolution from a model of racial division to an open democracy.
He transformed his countrymen's mood for revenge into one whose desire be a continuing search for national harmony rooted in truth and reconciliation.
And the most amazing thing about him to me has always been his total, complete absence of bitterness.
Since he left office, Mandela has worked tirelessly, championing various causes: third world debt relief, ending poverty, and fighting AIDS. Mandela lost his son to his disease earlier this year. He continues to carry his message throughout the world. The work to help those less fortunate is far from complete.
Mandela is the symbol of peace and justice and compassion worldwide.
One of the greatest human beings that have ever walked this earth since it was formed has been the Honorable Nelson Mandela.
Mandela will meet with President Bush on Tuesday when the two leaders will discuss education, development, and the fight against AIDS in Africa. At Riverside Church, Christopher King, News Channel 4.
Moving on, a little bit of a lighter event. We have some news agency images here from Spike Lee's wedding to Tanya Lewis, which was at Riverside on October 2nd, 1993. In attendance were activists Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, who visited Riverside many times. I believe Ossie Davis even preached from the pulpit at one point. I've seen an image of that. I'm not sure when that was. As well as actress Felicia Rashad and sportscaster Ahmad Rashad. were in attendance. Ozzie Davis had just recently appeared in Spike Lee's film Do the Right Thing, to come out just a few years prior. On November 27th, 1996, major event at Riverside was Jesse Norman Sings for AIDS. It was sort of a very early fundraising and sort of consciousness raising event about the impact of the AIDS epidemic on the Black community. The event featured the opera singer Jesse Norman, as well as Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and Whoopi Goldberg, and Elton John as well. Just a few images there.
Vince, if you could talk very briefly about why we don't have the video anymore.
Yes, so we had gone through this a little bit before. We had. It's very frustrating with finding these things. We had people, as I've said in past classes, people reach out to us all the time. Filmmakers, film producers. I mean, almost as often as congregants reach out to us, we have film producers reaching out to us, asking for footage from various events at Riverside, and so often it's very difficult to find much of anything about it. What we can find is usually just online. Other people, amateur historians or people who produce the video themselves will post stuff online. But our own video collection is mostly inaccessible to us. It's largely on videotapes and not even the standard videotape. VHS is sort of the standard home videotape format, but most of our tapes are on pneumatic tapes, which were more common for sort of commercial video at the time, but are nearly impossible to find playback equipment for those now. So we don't have access to our own copy of our own recording of this event. In the past, I've been able to find some video clips of the event, and it seemed, really, really beautiful. And you can see in some of these images just how kind of they really emphasized the beauty of the chancel. I think there's not a lot going on. It's a very sparse setup, and they're kind of in these beautiful robes. It seemed like a really lovely event. But yeah, but many of those videos have now also been taken down. I'm not quite sure what the cause of that is, but even those few videos online that I was able to find of this event a few months ago are gone now. So as we've mentioned in the past, we've applied for National Endowment for the Humanities grant to hopefully be able to digitize our video collection sometime in the near future. And we hope that things like this will be able to be recovered, and we can kind of relive some of these incredible events. But as of now, we rely very heavily on sort of these kinds of just videos online, news videos and amateur videos and stuff like that. So unfortunately, these photographs are kind of the best that we have at this time. In February 18th, 1997, then President Bill Clinton visited to hold a roundtable discussion led by Dr. Forbes discussing welfare reform. The previous year, Clinton had passed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, better known as welfare reform, which essentially gutted welfare. Clinton had said he wanted to end welfare as we know it. They argued at the time that reducing welfare would improve the unemployment rate, but it had virtually no impact. And studies have shown that it actually increased certain issues like drug crime recidivism, and increases in poverty in single-parent households. So I would love to be able to see a video of this roundtable. I kind of wonder what people's reaction at the time was to seeing Clinton, who had wanted to gut welfare. Also on his left was, I believe, his Health and Human Services Secretary, Donna Shalala, who I believe just lost her seat in Congress in Florida the other day. Clinton would visit again several times, including in 2004 as part of get out the vote efforts for the presidential election in 2004. In June 29th, 1997, there's a photo of Maya Angelou speaking during the memorial service for Dr. Betty Shabazz. Someone had asked me via email if Malcolm X had ever visited Riverside, and to our knowledge, I don't believe that he ever visited. I do know that there is an interview with him from WRVR, but I don't believe that he ever spoke or anything like that at Riverside that we know of. It's certainly possible, and of course, there's all kinds of events kind of unassociated with Riverside per se, held in the Assembly Hall and that kind of thing. So it's possible he came, and there is the interview with him from WRVR that we have. But I to my knowledge, there was never an event with Malcolm X himself. But while it was not her funeral, a memorial service was held after the death of Betty Shabazz at Riverside in June 1997. Betty Shabazz, also known as Betty X, had been Malcolm X's wife from 1958 until his death in 1965. Shabazz had remained an activist after her husband's death, and in 1990 was involved in the celebrations of Mandela's visit to the U.S. And a memorial service was held for her at Riverside. It was attended by Coretta Scott King and Myrlie Evers Williams, Medgar Evers' wife, Maya Angelou, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee returned again, New York Governor George Pataki, and 4 different New York City mayors, Abraham Beame, Ed Koch, David Dinkins, and Rudy Giuliani also all attended. So a major event, despite not even, it was not her actual funeral, but a memorial service, and obviously attended by a wide range of people. Here is a photo, an archives file photo, and I wondered if anyone might have some insight about this, because again, a lot of what we have available to us in terms of our photographs is what's been digitized before, and we're not always sure what an image is of per se, or what the event itself might have been. But this is from Paul McCartney visiting in November of 1997. In the photo is Martin Goldsmith, Manoli Farm, and Benjamin Rowe. I'm not sure who they all are. McCartney would later return in June of 1998. His wife, Linda McCartney's funeral service was held at Riverside too, and attended by a who's who of celebrities at the time. Here in December of 1999 sorry, John.
One thing I want to mention about the funeral for Paul McCartney's wife. I was a good friend with Shelley Bransford, who was one of the director of program services at the time. And she was involved in the planning of this event. I was not at it. I was involved in the ushers, but for one reason or another, I was not there. But Paul McCartney's wife was a big horse lover, okay? And they wanted to have the horse come through the chancel curtains and stand in the chancel during the service. And the church turned them down. This was a rental event. I mean, they paid a lot of money to have this at Riverside. This was not free. Okay? But they would not let them have a horse in the chancel. There was no way that Riverside was going to allow this, okay? But they eventually made an agreement where they built a ramp from the 122nd Street entrance up those stairs to the level of the nave, okay? Not the chancel, but the nave itself. So they brought the horse in. The horse stood there at the front during the service, And then when the service was over, they turned the horse around and took the horse out.
Wow. That's incredible. That's a great story, John.
Definitely a true story.
That's amazing. I've never heard that. I don't know how would it even, I'm a broad guy and I can barely fit through the chancel screen. So I don't know how they would have gotten a horse through there.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's an incredible story. I'm going to remember that one. I love that. Thank you very much for sharing. In December of 1999, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton visited, addressed an interfaith, interdenominational breakfast, discussing New York school and homelessness issues. Sorry, is there a question, Diane? When I'm sharing, it's hard for me to see messages. It kind of takes the messages away from me very quickly. Here we go.
Sorry, I was talking and I was muted. There's some comments from Caroline. Ossie Davis preached, and the title of his sermon was "What the dash 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 am I doing up here? What the blank am I doing up here?" I believe
what the hell?
What the hell am I doing up here? I believe it was on Father's Day, and Reverend Forbes was still our senior minister. It was a long and interesting sermon.
Wow.
Thank you. And Leonette, I was there singing with Ebony Ecumenical Ensemble when Mandela visited. Security was tight. We had to arrive at the crack of dawn and needed security clearance to enter Claremont's side.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I noticed that in that video of him processing in how tight the security is. There's just three guys with earpieces walking right behind him. So yeah, there must have been some serious concern at the time, and rightfully so, I'm sure. In January of 2000, and this is a really interesting event to me, and I would love to know more about it if anyone knows anything about it. But the grandmothers of Elian Gonzalez, Raquel Rodriguez on the left there, and Mariela Quintana on the right. Elian Gonzalez's grandmothers visited from Cuba sort of as a part of an appeal to return Elian to his father in Cuba. And so I don't know much more about the event or what Riverside's involvement was or anything like that, but I just kind of an interesting event that I found out about. And just, yeah. John?
Can you hear? This was on a Sunday morning, okay? Yeah. And we did not have a lot of notice about it. It was set up by the National Council of Churches. They sent a plane down to Cuba to pick up these two grandmothers and brought them up to New York. I don't know if they even spent the night, okay? And they appeared at the Sunday morning service. And then I think they went back to Cuba, okay? And of course, because it wasn't well publicized in advance, people didn't know about it until they arrived. I mean, I was involved with the ushers. I didn't know anything about it, okay? And I arrived at the church and there were all these satellite trucks outside. So I knew something big was happening, but there was no advance notice. And apparently it was because it was organized by the National Council of Churches as opposed to Riverside. And they wanted to use Riverside, obviously, for the location for the event. It was a publicity stunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were two of our members are in the photograph there with the two grandmothers. I think, I forget her name, Montero, I think, is one of the women who's in this photograph.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another one is Vielka Holness.
Yes, Vielka, thank you. I could not remember her name. Yeah. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yeah, very interesting. Later that year, in September, Fidel Castro visited Riverside, spoke to thousands attending the event. It was held during a UN summit, which is why he was in New York, mainly there to discuss problems with the US's embargo on Cuba. Castro, again, I'm sure most people know who Castro is, one of the main leaders of Cuba from 1959 until 2008. At Riverside, he sort of criticized what he called a lack of effort by wealthy nations to battle disease in poorer countries. He pointed out that that Cuba had sent doctors to developing nations like Angola. And he said that Cuba was ready to offer inexpensive medical training to 250 Americans per year, as long as they returned to the US to practice in poor areas. So another interesting political event there at Riverside.
Vince, another thing regarding that, it's still going on. There's an organization called IFCO that goes to Cuba each year. And the medical program for the training of doctors continues till today.
Wonderful. I did not know that I did not know that IFCO was involved in that. That's great. That's great. Thank you, Brad. Kind of an interesting one is George H.W. Bush, who, as you recall, Alan Bosack had instructed Riversiders not to vote for Bush. But here's George H.W. Bush in September of 2002, speaking at Lionel Hampton's funeral. Lionel Hampton was a jazz vibraphonist and actually was mentioned that he had played at Nelson Rockefeller's funeral, also at Riverside. So he had visited Riverside himself a few times.
He was a very prominent Republican, Lionel Hampton.
Really? Okay.
Yes, he was a Republican. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Here in, as we mentioned, Ossie Davis visited Riverside many times. His funeral was also held at Riverside in February of 2005. He was married to fellow activist Ruby Dee from 1948 until his death. Davis was one of a very few Black directors who found success in the 60s and 70s, and sort of along with Melvin Van Peebles and Gordon Parks was kind of one of the early prominent, African-American directors that sort of received, the proper funding and distribution. His first film, No Way Out, was directed by Joseph Mankiewicz and starred Sidney Poitier. Ruby Dee's memorial service was also held at Riverside in 2014. And so here's some of the attendees at Ossie Davis's funeral. Spike Lee and Harry Belafonte, Eartha Kitt and Eli Wallach, and Bill Clinton and Burt Reynolds.
Do you have that video in the archives?
We do not. Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I have it on, what do you call it? DVD.
Wonderful. I'm sure we would love to have a copy of that.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. If you have a copy, we'd love to get a copy.
We would, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In September of 2005, the Dalai Lama made a major speaking tour in the New York City area, including Riverside, on the 26th. Dalai Lama is the highest spiritual leader of Tibet and considered a living Buddha. He's also considered sort of the political leader in exile of Tibet. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. I believe he also visited again in 2010. We just have these images from 2005, but he visited Riverside again in 2010, I believe. Here we have, I mentioned Gordon Parks just a minute ago. Here we have Dr. Forbes speaking at the memorial service for Gordon Parks at Riverside in March of 2006. Gordon Parks, for those who may not be aware, is a prolific photographer and director. Parks got his start as a photographer for New Deal programs in the early 1940s, and he made sort of iconic portraits of the struggles that African Americans faced. And from the late 40s to the 1960s, he became a really prominent and respected commercial photographer for Vogue and then Life magazine, making iconic portraits of Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, Muhammad Ali, as well as documenting the Jim Crow South. At the time in the 60s, he was considered one of the most provocative and celebrated living photojournalists. And he would also become among the first African Americans, as I mentioned before, to produce and direct major motion pictures. The Learning Tree in 1969 was the first film directed by an African American for a major film studio, Warner Brothers. And later in 1971, he directed Shaft, sort of one of the first blaxploitation films. And also in 1984, he directed Solomon Northup's Odyssey, which was the first film adaptation of 12 Years a Slave. He was also the co-founder of Essence magazine in 1970 and served as its editorial director for the first 3 years. Here we have in August of 2007 was the funeral of the legendary jazz drummer Max Roach at Riverside. You can see on the left is Sonny Rollins arriving. Also in attendance were Roy Haynes, Cecily Tyson, Chico Hamilton, Yusef Lateef, former New York Mayor David Dinkins, the actor Delroy Lindo. Speakers included Maya Angelou, Amiri Baraka, Lieutenant Governor David Patterson, Charles Rangel, Bill Cosby, Stanley Crouch, and of course, Dr. Forbes as well as Reverend Dr. Calvin Butts. Max Roach was remembered as being a pioneer of bebop and prominent jazz musician who sort of early on fused his music with his civil rights activism, especially with the 1960 sort of avant-garde suite, We Insist, which was intended as kind of a centennial celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation. And its cover featured Roach and his bandmates sitting in at a lunch counter. The album is sort of considered one of the great jazz records of all time. So his funeral was at Riverside as well. And then just finally, Noam Chomsky, also a perennial visitor, seemingly several times. But here he is in June of 2009. A path-breaking linguist, as well as a prominent critic of U.S. foreign policy from the 1960s and 1970s. He visited in 2009 for a lecture called Crisis and Hope, Theirs and Ours, sort of talking about the global economic crisis and U.S. military intervention, as well as the election of Barack Obama. And that's all that we have for slides, but I would love to hear people's questions, hear people's comments. If there's anything I missed, I'm sure that I missed many things. I would love to hear from everyone what I got wrong and what you'd like to if you had any thoughts about any of these events or any experiences you'd like to share.
Yeah, especially anything we missed, because as Vince said, with one example where we didn't have an image, was it Rustin, I think? We didn't have an image of that. We found the citation in one of our sources. And so, I'm sure there's many events that we don't have images for yet. They're not digitized, that we haven't seen in the record. So just we're our hands are tied based on like what we have access to. So we're sure we missed a lot.
Yeah.
One funeral that was impressive for me was Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes. And all of the people who were living there, Mike Wallace and Andy Rooney and other CBS people were there for it. It's a beautiful service. Wynton Marsalis played a dirge going in and then more celebratory music going out.
Wow, that sounds incredible. Linda?
Yeah, Brad took away my thought there. I forgive you, Brad. Yeah, I have somewhere around the house the actual program from that funeral. So when I can find it, I will scan it and get it to you.
Thank you.
So you can have that.
Vince, do you want to tell them the story of how we sort of crashed a funeral? Like was it a year ago for
Not
the
sure.
labor activist?
Oh yes,
Well, we sort of like we kind of realized we ended up behind the chancel. Do you want to tell that?
We didn't crash it, but we
almost
we were trying to figure out where some room was, and we ended up realizing that we were behind the chancel in the middle of the funeral of Figueroa. I forget his first name, but he was the head of an SEIU union, and so it was actually while Bill de Blasio was running for president, and we walked past several Secret Service people, and they didn't seem too bothered that we just brushed by them. So
they actually asked us where the bathroom was.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. His detail was there, but we had been trying to figure out. So what Vince and I do is archives are everywhere in the church, everywhere. And so we like to take excursions and open doors and go through hallways and passageways to see where things are. So we were following like a lead and trying to find a room, and we looked at each other. We're like, where are we? Because we had ended up outside this door. We're like, where are we? And then we realized, like, we poked our heads through. We were behind the chancel, and we saw like all of the cameras, and it was this funeral. And I don't know if any of you remember this. It was almost a year ago, maybe, that they were even projecting from Grant's tomb. We were so packed that the nave was packed, Christ Chapel was packed. Some people were put at Grant's tomb, and so we witnessed that really cool, really big gathering of this really important activist by accident, and we almost crashed his funeral. But yeah, it was very. I know that we have so many. Hector Figueroa, yes, exactly. Thank you. We have so many funerals of illustrious people. It's wonderful that we're able to hold these events in our space.
Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to add? Any questions?
I'm looking through the chat to make sure we haven't missed anything.
I just wanted to comment that I remember vividly Bishop Tutu and his sermons at Riverside. Very powerful and very energetic. He was always passionate in his sermons. And another one that I really liked and enjoyed was Alan Bosack, another very powerful speaker. And he had an interesting sort of high-pitched voice. And my husband and I would often, reflect on it, that looking at him, you wouldn't think that voice came out of that body. But those were wonderful days where we were involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and it was very exciting and very powerful when Mandela did come to Riverside. And I think I may have a DVD of some of that as well. I'll look at what I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, as Vince mentioned, we're sure that we have video, probably really good quality. They're just on formats that right now are inaccessible to us. I mean, he did mention we wrote a grant. Hopefully we'll get it to start digitizing these outdated formats. But again, I'm sure we have so many wonderful coverages of these events, and it's just we're in the state again. I think we mentioned the last time, like, the 70s, 80s, and 90s are really, and early 2000s, really tricky for archivists to find information because in most cases it's only on some sort of media John, would you like to?
I may be mistaken on this, but my recollection from the Nelson Mandela service, the first time he appeared at Riverside, was I know for a fact that the accredited press group was 400 people. Okay, and they were on the far sides in the nave. They filled the whole far side, front to back, with press. Okay, but I think that because there was such demand for cameras there, I think Riverside did the camera work and sold it to the networks. So I can't imagine that you don't have it. Okay, I might be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure that's what was done, because the demand for people to let their film crews in was just overwhelming. Okay, but I think Riverside did it and sold it. Okay, to cover their costs.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, we actually we're trying to learn more about it, and again, you know, if anyone knows anything about it and wants to send us some information about it, but the Riverside Video Project was sort of alive and well at that time, I believe, and so they would have been, I believe, the ones sort of running that. And so I think what you're saying, John, is definitely, I think what happened more, you know, even for more than just Mandela's, I believe that we were sort of the in-house, did the footage in-house and then kind of farmed it out to the networks in many cases. So yeah, I mean, part of that is why you know, why we think going for this grant is so necessary and so important, is because some of this stuff is we are the archive of last resort for many of these videos. It's not as if you know, a lot of the material is original material produced by Riverside itself, and so that's part of why we're hoping that we can you know, digitize and preserve this material. Something I wanted to add was that sorry, changing the subject, something that I wanted to add quickly was someone had also asked me if Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, had ever visited Riverside, and similar to I don't believe that he ever visited personally, as far as I know. I could be totally wrong, but to my understanding, from what I've been able to research, I'm not certain that he ever visited personally. However, there was a memorial service held for him at Riverside in 1999 after his passing. So I'm not sure that he personally ever visited, but his memorial service, or a memorial service, was held at Riverside after his death.
Yeah, that's something we see in the archives a lot. Illustrious people that we're not sure ever in their lifetime came to Riverside, but because of the associations that they had with our mission and social justice and things like that, we held a memorial in their honor. So that's something that we see a lot happening. We have in the chat, Rosella has a comment on Nelson Mandela and Max Roach. So if you want to, Rosella, if you want to unmute yourself, and please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, regarding the Mandela archive. Well, when Mandela came to Riverside, on the screen, you notice the call to worship. There is a woman there who is speaking, and she is Dr. Thelma Adair. She is a Presbyterian educator. And when I saw the video, I thought to myself, well, she must be over 90. So it so happened, I saw the video in the spring. I called her, and she said, yes, she would return 100 years old in August. So anyway, she's 100 years young.
Wow.
Right now. And my comment regarding Max Roach, there were some visitors from the French consulate. He had received the award, I think it's called the Légion d'honneur from France. And there were two people representing France who came to Riverside for the memorial. I happened to be one of the volunteers, and they were late because the casket was viewing in Christ Chapel, So they were the very last one. So I was, as a volunteer, I went around, and there was another person who was late. His name was, I wrote his name down, Phil Schaff. He was a jazz person also. So they went in, and so they were able to participate.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Rosella.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosella. We've got a handwritten couple of comments. So let's do Linda Lewis. You've raised your hand if you want to chat, and then we'll get to the two comments, Leonette and Doug Miller.
Okay, there are two events that come to mind. I do not recall the exact dates. One was a one-on-one interview with Hillary Clinton, which was actually a fundraiser for a faith-based organization she's involved with, which gives summer camp privileges to disadvantaged children. And the other one was an evening with Maya Angelou, who had Common and a few other rappers, and it was a musical program. That was also very interesting as well. I was at both of those.
Thank you for sharing.
Do you remember when that one with Common was? Was that?
I ran across that program about a month ago. I'm trying to declutter. I didn't throw it out, so that's still a part of my clutter. So I will find that, and I also have the Hillary one.
Okay, great.
I have both of those.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask particularly about Common is I know that he's been at Riverside multiple times. I think the last time was last year. Right. And so he's a common visitor.
I do have photographs from the Maya Angelou visit. If it's on my digital, I can probably bring up the dates. If I bring it up in photos, I can bring up the dates and I can tell you exactly when that was.
That would be great. If you could email.
I do have photos from that.
Great. Thank you. So I'm Leonette, I see yours. I'm just going to briefly go to Doug Miller because it ties into what Linda Lewis was just talking about. I remember when former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton attended worship service and participated in taking part of communion at Riverside.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know, Doug or Linda, when was that one? Do you know?
I don't recall. I do remember seeing all the Chevy Suburbans around the church when she was there, and security up the wazoo.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Oh boy. I don't recall the date. I just remember the surrounding events, like your crashing the chancel. That type of thing.
We've got some sleuthing to do. We'll find it out. We'll figure it out.
Have you ever been to that room in back of the assembly hall where they had cameras and lights and things? Room up there. There's a room up there.
Yes.
Okay.
We stumbled on that room, right, Vince? I think we did, and we stumbled on that.
Any goodies in there?
A lot of storage, like a lot of the rooms are used for storage. I think we saw a cart of Bibles. Okay. I think that was the room. And yeah, a lot of our rooms are used for storage of random things.
Yeah, that's the one they used to control the lighting on the stage in the assembly hall. There's a room up there and back.
Yeah.
John, do you have a comment about?
That room that you're talking about is entered from the cloister and it overlooks the assembly hall. It was built as a projection room.
Yeah.
It was a projection room so they could have films shown on the screen in the assembly hall.
Thank you. We have so many rooms. Vincent, I tell you, we go wandering as the archivist, and our the staff, especially the building and grounds and engineering guys, they're always like, hey, welcome to our part of the buildings, because these are rooms that I think most people don't go into anymore. They're not actively used. But there's good stuff everywhere. Our guys are always telling us, they're always calling us or coming up to our offices like, hey, we found this really amazing lamp. Like, it looks really old. It might be Tiffany's, or it might be a Tiffany lamp. Do you want it? Do you want to come and see it? We're like, absolutely, yes. So
Max may know a lot. If he knows anything about that Nooks and Crannies tour that we used to have, he may know where a lot of the Nooks and Cranny rooms are. Because he knows the church pretty well.
Yeah, thank you. So we have Leonette, we'll get to your comment. How about Amiri Baraka?
Yes, Amiri Baraka, I believe, visited several times. I actually and actually was at I actually have a video of it if you guys want to see it, but Amiri Baraka spoke at the Kwame Ture Memorial I was talking about before. So at Stokely Carmichael's memorial at Riverside, Amiri Baraka spoke then. At least I wouldn't be surprised if there were several visits, but at least that one for sure.
Thank you. So I have another one in the chat, and then we'll go to Caroline because I see you have your hand raised. So from Karen in the chat.
Dick Gregory. This is Leonette.
Sorry?
Did you hear me ask about Dick Gregory?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I wanted to add that I asked about Amiri Baraka. Do you know if Dick Gregory was there ever?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. Not to my knowledge. I do know that Dick Gregory, I had mentioned in the past, or we've talked a little bit in the past about the WRVR documentary about the Birmingham campaign, which Dick Gregory was involved in. And there are interviews with Dick Gregory in that WRVR documentary, but I'm not certain about whether Dick Gregory ever visited. I can look into it.
Thank you. So Karen from the chat, is there anything in the archives that suggests certain renowned people were turned down from speaking at Riverside? Not that I've seen, but this isn't something that we actively have looked for.
It's a great question.
It's a great question. I don't know if I think Brad might have jumped off the call. Brad might know. He's dug around, or maybe Mace or John, if you know. But it's a really great question. I don't know. I feel like it's entirely feasible, but it's not something that we've actively tried to research. So I don't know. John?
Riverside does not have a history of turning down people who want to appear, especially if it's a rental event. Okay, it's different if it's something sponsored by the church. Okay, but for a rental event, basically anybody is welcome to rent the space. On another subject, when Fidel Castro came to Riverside, I think that he was at Riverside because all of the New York hotels turned down his rental requests because he was very controversial and they didn't want the security problems in their hotel from having Fidel Castro. So that's why he ended up at Riverside.
Interesting.
I always wondered that. When I found that photo maybe like a couple weeks ago in the archive. I was like, wow, I wonder what the circumstances were behind that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fidel ended up having to stay at the Hotel Teresa on 125th Street because, as John said, they didn't welcome him at the Hilton or any of those other places. Another jazz memorial that was there was Art Blakey. I don't remember when that was, but I attended that one, and I'm not sure if I have a program or not. I have so much stuff in here. I'm like Linda. I'm like a rat pack. I just hold on to stuff.
Well,
I didn't know that. I would have absolutely. He's one of my favorites. I would have included him if I'd known that. That's great. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing.
Anything that you all happen to come across in your personal papers and things that you've saved, we'd be grateful to have a copy, or we can digitize it. So make copies of it for the archive. Caroline, would you like to make a comment or question?
Just a couple of comments, but starting with Fidel Castro, I think he was at Riverside twice. But the first time when he was staying at the Hotel Teresa, as Miss Anderson said, my uncle was working there, and he said he met him. But the second time he was at Riverside, one of my relatives was there, and he said Fidel spoke for over 3 hours, unscripted, just continuous.
I've heard that before, actually.
Yeah.
That he's notorious for his
correct, just
long-winded
on
speeches.
and on. With Dr. Betty Shabazz, I saw that service on television, and the audience booed Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor at the time. And Betty Shabazz's eldest daughter, Tala, who was speaking on behalf of the daughters, she admonished the crowd for doing that. And she said, that is not how the Shabazz family lived their life. So that was pretty interesting to watch.
Wow.
Percy Sutton's funeral I attended, that was about 3 hours. The governor at the time was David Patterson, and he was in the first balcony recording a message because he couldn't stay. And I had snuck up to get a good seat, and I actually viewed him recording the message. But what was interesting to me at Percy Sutton's funeral was the presence of the Tuskegee Airmen, because I had never seen any in person, and there were about 3 or 4. One spoke, and they had on their red hats and their uniforms, and it was very impressive.
Wow.
And the last thing was, Riverside had a program, I don't remember when, but it was called A Bomb in Gilead, and Elton John performed. Yes, oh my God, that was great. And I remember Arthur Mitchell, who was the founder of the Dance Theater Harlem, he was there. And I don't know if Stevie Wonder was there, but I saw Stevie Wonder perform at someone's funeral, or I saw Stevie Wonder perform at Riverside. I'm not sure of what, but he was there also. But that Balm and Gilead performance benefit, that was spectacular.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. As soon as you said it, I was like, yes, yes, yes. I've seen that in the archive a lot. Yeah. Yeah. We have so much digging to do.
Yeah.
This is great. It's really
Oh,
great.
and check in, there's some secret room in 9T in the back also. Have you been back there? It has a lot of stuff. When
Oh,
you
yeah.
enter- yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yep. We we have a lot in the back of 9T. There's like all the way in the back, and it's
That's right.
got a really beautiful like ceiling. There's another room, and you can see the beams. Right. Anyway, it's right above the nave. So yes, we know those rooms. Emily, do you want to? You made a comment in the chat. Do you want to mention it here?
Yeah, I don't remember the date, but Bill, it must have been, I guess, around in the 90s. Bill Lynch was a political strategist who worked with David Dinkins and I believe Bill Clinton. His funeral was at Riverside. Actually, I knew Bill Lynch from before he became a political strategist. He was a guy who had a program on WBAI, which was sort of a radical broadcast station. And he worked with me at the Graduate Center at CUNY. And when he passed, I was, of course, quite devastated because he was pretty young. But his funeral was at Riverside. And I remember Wynton Marsalis and some other artists doing the typical New Orleans funeral ritual. That was really quite powerful as well. I don't know if that's recorded or not, but that was interesting as well.
If I could just say, since we're on the subject of funerals, I did not attend this, but Al Lewis, who was the actor, I don't know if you guys know The Munsters. I used to watch that show with my father on Nick at Night, and he was Grandpa. So like the Dracula, Count Dracula, his funeral was at Riverside. I found going through the memorials collection, the program. So that was an interesting one because I thought he was Jewish. But it wouldn't matter with Riverside, but I don't know why he his family chose Riverside. I mean, it wasn't, it was the program was there, but I thought that was kind of cool and interesting. I don't know if he had any other connections with Riverside, but that's one person I thought was interesting. I used to watch that show, so I recognized him immediately.
Yeah, me too.
One interesting thing I noticed, and I realized at the end, I kind of felt bad about this, that I think I only included funerals, and I don't think I included any weddings. But something interesting I did note as I was doing the research was, it seemed like sort of very early on there was a rush of funerals at Riverside, a rush of weddings at Riverside. I believe the head of Firestone had his wedding at Riverside. John D. Rockefeller III had his wedding at Riverside. So there was sort of this rush early on in Riverside's history of sort of prominent industrialists getting married there. But then sort of, at least from what I can discern from what I can research and everything, it seems like it's become more of a funeral place for these prominent people, and less of a wedding place. I don't know what that means or what that indicates, but it's a little morbid, I guess. But yeah, so I apologize I didn't include any weddings in there.
You did. You included Spike Lee's.
Oh, I did have Spike Lee's. Yes, I forgot.
Yeah. And a lot of maybe it's also because the weddings, a lot of them, I don't know if you know Angela Gregory, if you folks know her, she's a longtime staff member. She has a lot of the wedding records. They're still active, so they haven't yet come to the archive. So it may be just that she's still got those records and we haven't gotten them yet. And so there could be gold in there.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else they want to add? Again, I'll say anything that you remember, that you find in your own collections, whether they be photographs. Linda, you mentioned that, Caroline and others, the programs or DVDs or moving images, we'd love to see them.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
Next week we will be discussing, what are we discussing, Vince? Community, Riverside's community. And we'll have some guest speakers from the congregation. So one of them is here, Linda Lewis. She'll be talking about B's and P's. So this is going to be an exciting one. We're going to try to hear again from you all. We want your, this is going to be another one heavy on your comments as part of the Riverside community, but we'll go back into history and talk about the early days and then end with you guys chatting, I hope. Look out for an email because there is a meeting next week. Is it an annual? There's an annual meeting, right? So I think we're going to move the time of the class. I'm working with Bruce to figure out when that would be good for everyone. If not, then we'll just skip it and then we'll do the next Sunday after that and just extend the class. I'll let you guys know about that. I think those meetings tend to run long, so we don't want to. We don't want to run into that time and then have folks missing it or missing our class because that's a very important meeting to go to. So just look out for an email from us on that. And then we'll have another one, a final class. So there's 2 more left scheduled to be decided. Oh, let's see. We've got Doug Miller, wonderful discussion, love tour of those hidden rooms. I think maybe we should one day when we're back in the office, Vince and I should just like have a camera follow us as we go through the rooms and see all of the wonderful things. It's also a little bit scary because some things are neglected and they've just been there for years. And when we see the state of things, it can be a little scary, but I think we should do that, Vince.
I think we found, I think at one point we found the room where most of the pigeons in Harlem live.
Yes.
in one of the rooms up there. So
yeah. Yeah, so Emily said try to reschedule. Yeah, so I'll let you know. I'll talk to Bruce about it, about rescheduling next week's class or doing a different time. You all get the emails that we send out? Yes, okay, great. So, and if you don't for some reason hear from us, let us know, because sometimes I get a bounce back. It says like some of them weren't delivered. I don't know if you get that sometimes, Vince. So I'm not sure if you don't, if for some reason it bounces back and you don't hear from us, just email us directly.
And also check into your junk. A lot of Riverside email has been ending up in my spam folder or junk folder. Yeah, so.
Okay. All right, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.